Great to see everybody today. I am really excited for this Lunch and Learn series, and I'm sad that we are still doing things on Zoom, that we don't have some folks here in our office joining us and actually eating lunch in person together as we've been able to do in the past. But I'm really thankful that we could still do this and be together virtually this afternoon. So wherever you're joining us from, really glad that you're here. Again, I know we'll have some folks on replay watching as well. So welcome to you whenever you're able to join us. If I don't know you, my name is Melissa Mackey. I'm the director of Faith and Work Chicago, and we're a ministry of Cru City and Holy Trinity Church, committed to helping the scattered church live out our faith in the context of our daily work. And that's for the good of the city and the glory of God. You can check out some of our resources, some of our past recordings on our website at faithandworkchicago.com. We've done a bunch of different Lunch and Learn series, and all of those are recorded and posted if you ever want to go back to any of those. But this winter, because it's part of January, part of February, the series that we're in, we've called Invested in the City, How Gospel Transformation Takes Root Industry by Industry. And we thought as we started the new year that we really wanted to just kind of take a step back and take a look at the big picture of what God is doing in our city. I think that sometimes we're maybe aware of small pockets of God's work, maybe in the churches that we're a part of or ministries we're connected to, or even in our own daily workspace. But we wanted to look at what are, some of the bigger issues that plague our city, areas of violence, education, economics, justice. And so I get really excited about the way that the leaders of Together Chicago have sought to address these issues through what they call collective impact. And they've really put their hands to the work and networked in a lot of different areas, and some of these really difficult areas, to be part of what God is doing and renewing and transforming our city through the power of the gospel. So last week, Dr. Peter spoke to us about the power of prayer, and when the faith community really comes together to care about and pray together for our city, sort of beyond our individual tribes and individual churches. I was super encouraged by all that we talked about. And if you haven't already done this, I would really encourage you to take a look at the website and register for the virtual event coming up on January 30th to be part of praying for our city. So we're going to continue having a window into these different focus areas of Together Chicago over the next few weeks. And today we have a really just exciting privilege, I think, of hearing from one of the founders and the Chief Strategy Officer, Michael Allen, I think as well, your co-founder. David Dillon might also be stopping by at some point. But Michael, I'm going to give you a chance to share in just a minute more about yourself, about the organization, how things got started. I know he's also going to specifically be speaking to us about the area of violence reduction, but just wanted to give a quick heads up on where we're going. Michael's going to share for a bit. We'll have some time for Q&A for sure. I think you could also drop questions in the chat as we go along. There'll be some time for Q&A at the end. I think he's also open to, at any point, if you have questions. We're a small enough group, I think we can interact together. But yeah, feel free to drop any questions in the chat if you'd like. We'll try to make sure to get to those. But without further ado, I'd love to welcome Michael Allen. Going to have you take us away. I'll turn it over to you. So thanks so much for being with us. Really thrilled to have you this morning.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Melissa. It is a privilege to be here, and certainly excited and delighted to be a part of the Lunch and Learn. And I'm glad that you were able to have Dr. John Feuder last week. He is near and dear to all of our hearts, longtime friend and partner in ministry from my days back on staff at the Moody Church. And in fact, John and I go back to my seminary days at Trinity. And it's so amazing that we get to work together at Together Chicago and Chicagoland United in prayer. And so thanks to you for creating this forum where believers can come together and really just share hearts and learn about what God is doing across the city beyond their own local church or ministry. And so thanks to all of you who have joined us here this afternoon. We're in for a lot of fun together. So as I share a little bit about my story and the TC story, feel free to ask questions, and then of course we'll try to for sure leave some time at the end for a Q&A session, if that's all right. I got into this work of violence reduction as a local church pastor on the north side. About 8 years ago, while pastoring at Uptown Baptist Church, which is a church on the north side, just about a mile northeast of Wrigley Field. I was in the back of the church sanctuary. We were having our Monday night fellowship meal, where we welcome in a couple of hundred homeless or near homeless people into the church sanctuary. We have a brief devotional with them for some spiritual food, and then they go downstairs for some belly food. And during that spiritual devotional time, one of our lay preachers was giving the devotional, and I was sitting in the back of the sanctuary, and I heard what at first sounded like fireworks. It was August 19th, about 8 years ago, and I looked at my watch to see what was the calendar date, and turns out, it was August 19th. I'm thinking, well, it's long past 4th of July fireworks. So I stepped out of the back of the church and saw 5 people laying on the ground bleeding. Blood was pooling at the church steps. There was a drive-by shooting that happened. And one man was struck in the head and died within 48 hours of his injuries. The others had just some flesh wounds and I think recovered just fine. But that shooting right outside of our church, some of our guests had just eaten and come out from the first group that came through. That God just wouldn't let me get over that shooting. I wasn't unfamiliar with shootings. Shootings happen in Rogers Park where I live. My kids sometimes hear shooting as they lay down to go to sleep. And certainly other shootings had happened in Uptown, in and around, around the church, nearby the church, and sitting in my office, we could hear gunshots from time to time in Uptown. But for whatever reason, this particular shooting, I just couldn't get it out of my mind and out of my heart, and God began to do something inside of me that wanted to respond to the violence that was growing in our city. And so I called a friend of mine, Vance Henry, who worked in the mayor's office and who still works in the mayor's office. He's served 3 mayors now. Vance is a believer and a preacher himself, ordained minister of the gospel. And I said, Vance, I'm sure by now you heard about this violence that's just happened outside of our church. I said, but the church, I want to lead our church to do something. I said, I think God wants us to minister to both sides of the gun. I want to know who the guys are that are pulling triggers in my neighborhood. I want to know who the victims are, because there must be a gospel response to this violence. And he was very hesitant. I don't think he'd ever had a pastor ask him for direct involvement in trying to minister on both sides of the gun before. And it took him a couple of months before he got back to me, and he connected me to a guy named Chris Millette, who incidentally now works for us at Together Chicago. But Chris had worked in the mayor's office in juvenile justice division, and now that time he was now working for an organization called the National Network for Safe Communities, which started in the John Jay College of Criminal Justice in Manhattan, New York. And Chris was running the office here in Chicago. And Vance said, hey, I want you to meet with Chris. You might be able to he might be able to point you in the right direction to get you what you want, the kind of information you need to minister to people who are involved in victims and perpetrators of violence. And so Chris met with me, and I gather in our first meeting that he was a little reluctant to meet with me. And after I told him what had happened and told him my heart and what God was just stirring me to do and to lead our church, to be involved in this, he just said to me, hey, Pastor, I'm sorry what happened at your church. And I'm really, I feel for you that you want to be engaged and involved in this work. But he says, I have a very simple rule. It's a no pee rule. He says, I don't work with pastors, I don't work with priests, I don't work with police, and I don't work with politicians. And I said, okay, I hear you, but tell me why you don't work with pastors and priests. He says, well, most of the violence happens in certain communities, or only about 10 communities of the 77 neighborhoods in Chicago. Only about 10 to 12 of them are really violent. And in those communities, the pastors that minister there, by and large, they just want to be on TV, and they got their own agenda, and I don't trust them to work with me in the work that we do, because we're working with violent gang members, and we just have to be very discreet how we work with these guys, and I just can't, I don't trust the pastors that, you know, are in the neighborhoods that we work in. So I said to him, I kind of leaned forward. I didn't want to take that no as an answer, the final answer. So I said, listen, I don't care about being in the news, on the newspaper. I don't care about, you know, TV news. I don't care about my 5 minutes of fame. I really want to help people. That's what it's about for me. I said, there's no way that the church who preaches the gospel of the Lord Jesus Christ and who represents the body of Christ on earth, there's no way that we can't get involved in this work, or that we can't work to bring some semblance of peace and reconciliation and justice in this work. So I said, if you will let me work with you, I promise you that I will not upstage your work. I will not, you know, do anything to jeopardize the work that you're doing, and I'll play by the rules. You just tell me what I need to do, and what landmines to avoid, and I'll do that. And he took a chance, and I became the first pastor that he led into this world of working in the nonviolence area. Next thing I know, he bought a plane ticket and had me going to New York to the John Jay College of Criminal Justice for basically a convention on violence reduction, with people who are working in that violence reduction space all over the country, where gun violence is an issue. These people were trained by David Kennedy and others. By the way, let me mention a book. If you haven't read that book, it's called Don't Shoot. And then there's a long subtitle. But if you just look up the book, Don't Shoot by David Kennedy, you should read that book if you're interested in this area of understanding, better understanding this whole area of violence, and why young men decide to pick up guns in the first place and risk their lives and liberty to do it. And then some strategies that are very effective in reducing gun violence. Now, there's, just so you know, there's lots of foul language in the book because of the nature of the work and the people that are, you know, doing this work. So it's not a book for, you know, it's not a book written by Christians or even for Christians, but it's worth your attention if you can stomach all the foul language that's in there. But it's real stories about real lives, and a real solution, part of a solution to the problem. And so I've been now to New York 2 or 3 times, John Jay College of Criminal Justice, over the years, since that fateful day in the back of my church sanctuary where I heard those gunshots. And God just continued to stir in me a desire to try to figure this thing out and understand, what place does the gospel and the church of the Lord Jesus Christ have in coming to the table and being a part of the solution, as opposed to a part of the problem, or just a bystander. And so one of the things that I started to do with Chris's organization is to ride around with the police. So they had this program called Custom Notifications, where the commanders of each district in high violent neighborhoods, they have their top 10 list of most violent guys that they target for this program. And the police partners with churches and other nonprofit organizations, providing resources so that these young men, when introduced to those resources in a way that they can believe the resources are really for them, they have an opportunity to choose to get off that cycle, that wheel of endless cycle of violence, either to be hunted or to hunt. And so we would go with the police, knock on guys' doors unannounced, just knock, knock, knock. They don't know we're coming. The commander is with us, TAC officers, intelligence officers. Sometimes they surround the house or the building of the individual we're going to see, just to ensure that we have the best chance to message them. And when the person comes to the door, whether it's a parent or a guardian or the person that we're actually looking for, they all get the same message. And the first message is from the police, from the superintendent. It's a letter that basically lets a person know that they are at great risk of being a victim or perpetrator of violence, and that they know who they are. They know the clique they're part of, or the tribe, the gang that they're part of. And the police will stop them if they make them stop them, because that's their job. And so the police gives a message of warning. And then the police turns to me, the pastor, and now we've trained about a dozen other pastors to do this work around the city. And they say, well, so I step in with my message of help and hope. So the police is really the stick, and we're the carrot, if you want to think about it in that way. The police gives a message of warning, and we give a message of hope and help. So my message to the guy simply is, listen, we care about you. You are worth more to this community alive and free than dead or in prison. So the police will stop you if you make them, but we will help you if you let us. That's our message to these guys. And we believe the foundation of that strategy is the belief that these guys are rational actors. There is a reason why they choose to pick up and carry a gun every day of their lives. There's a reason why they seek to hunt and target and shoot other guys on the street. And so we try to get at those reasons and to give them options. A lot of these guys falsely believe that the system, the economic system, the justice system, this system of these United States of America does not work for them. That's the lie that they believe. They believe that the system is rigged against them, that nobody cares about them, and that the only way they can, get anything in life is by carjacking, robbing, stealing, kill or be killed, selling dope on the street, taking territory. That's the only thing that they know, and that's the only thing that they believe will get them what they need to survive and to take care of their families. So that's the lie that they believe, which then in their own minds justifies carrying a gun and using that gun to get what they want or to protect themselves. And so we try to help them, get rid of that lie and replace the lie with the truth that actually, no, people do care about you. The system is not rigged against you. There are opportunities that are provided for you, and here they are. Tell us what resource you need to make different decisions every day. When you get up, if you had a resource that would allow you to make a different decision, what would that be? And so that's our promise to them, that if any resource that they ask for, we will find that resource, put it in their hands to help them make different decisions that are healthier for them. So after doing that program for a couple of years, then came 2016, when violence really shot up in our city. That year we had something like 700 plus murders, over 4,000 or 3,000 people shot and wounded. And I mean, it was a crazy year. So I then began meeting with a lot of leaders, very influential leaders, asking the question, could the church come together and have a collective impact on this violence? Different segments of the church, different segments of our society, and the church within those different segments. And God gave me a vision. In fact, it was the vision of the same corner of our church where that shooting took place several years earlier. The vision was of the intersection of Wilson and Sheridan in Uptown. And on each corner of that intersection, the four corners, I saw these words: faith, politics, business, and race. And God was saying to me, Michael, I want to use you to bring together people of different ethnic backgrounds, people from the police department, people from business, people from the faith community, and politics, to help work together to reduce gun violence. And so while I was convening these meetings, my co-founder was convening similar meetings about the same thing, asking the same questions, unbeknownst to me or to him. He didn't know about me, I didn't know about him, until a mutual friend of ours, Brian Dye, introduced Dave Dillon and I. And Brian said to me, hey, you need to, if you don't know Dave Dillon, I think he's trying to do something like you're trying to do, you should meet and talk with him. And so I met with Dave and began to share my heart with him and vision of what God had given me about this issue of violence. And Dave was like, you're crazy. That's exactly what the vision God had given me and put on my heart. And so the more Dave and I talked, is the more we realized that God may be truly in this thing and really wanting to catapult the church to be engaged and involved. And I'm talking about the Big C church, not just a church or two churches, but the church in Chicago and beyond, to be engaged in this work. And so I said, Dave, I've got a meeting scheduled with my leadership team out in Galena in a couple of months. Why don't you bring your team out to meet with mine, and let's pray and seek God together about this. And so we did that. We had about 30 to 40 very influential leaders from all those sectors. We had politicians there, we had business people there, we had police there, we had faith leaders there, and people from different ethnicities. It was an amazing gathering of Chicago leaders, very influential leaders. And we all looked around the room and thought, wow, we either know each other or we know of each other, but we've never been in the same room together talking about sharing resources to solve a specific problem together. And so at the end of that weekend, we all kind of threw our hands in together and said, we've got to do this. We have to do something about this violence. So this was the spring of 2017. And Together Chicago was born. And that's the reason why we called our organization Together Chicago, because God really showed us that this idea of collective impact is crucial to getting anything done. Dave and I had read this paper from Stanford University about collective impact, which basically looked historically over time and concluded that no significant lasting change in society had ever been accomplished apart from collective impact. And so we said, we're going to create an organization that is like a backbone organization that brings people together. And so Together Chicago, really, we do four things really well around five initiatives. Those four things are, it's the four C's. So we convene, we converse, we covenant, and we catalyze around the issue of reducing violence and increasing thriving communities. And the way we do that is through these five initiatives. One you heard about last week, Chicagoland United in Prayer. We believe that nothing good happens without prayer. And by the way, I'm sure Doc talked to you last week about the gathering that's coming up January 30th. It's going to be virtual, unfortunately, again, because of COVID. We were planning to be live at New Life Covenant Southeast, brand new sanctuary down there. with Pastor John Hanna, who opened up his doors to us. But because of the recent uptick in the Omicron virus, we decided to go virtual again, as we did last year. So January 30th, tune in, Chicagoland United in prayer. People will come together to continue to pray for our city. And what started happening is through these prayer events, people started asking, well, what can we do in addition to our prayers? And the answer was, what if God wanted us to be the answer, at least part of the answer to the prayers that we were praying? What if in addition to our praying together, God wanted us to begin to lock arms and actually work together, serve together, and bring resources to the table together for the sake of the city and for the sake of peace, a more peaceful and vibrant city. So our goal is to reduce gun violence and increase simultaneously thriving communities. So prayer is the first initiative, and now we have hundreds of churches that come together to pray with us each year. And then the second is education. As we polled people, we began to understand that a lot of kids get recruited into gangs because kids who are vulnerable academically and are not doing well, they're not reading, they're not writing when they should be reading and writing at a certain level in school. They become disinterested, as you can imagine, because they're frustrated because they can't learn and they're failing their classes. Then they drop out of school, join a gang, commit a crime. So what if we can attack this problem both in a preventative way as well as a responsive, reactionary way? So this is our preventative strategy, is going into schools. So now we're in about 40 schools. So where we go and we adopt the schools, and then we partner churches in proximity to those schools. We train up and mobilize volunteers from those churches into those schools to tutor the most at-risk kids in 3rd and 6th grade primarily, because those are the 2 grades that kids are most likely to drop out of school, get recruited into gang life, if you can believe it or not, as young as 3rd graders, 4th graders. Just last week, you may have heard on the news, 2 14-year-old boys were shot and killed on the same day, one of them in the neighborhood where we are working. And we met with the father and mother last Friday at a prayer vigil in the West Haven Park community where he was shot and killed. And we're going to be helping with the funeral service next Monday. And so kids are getting involved in this violence at a younger and younger age. So education must be part of the strategy. But we not only tutor the kids, especially in reading and mathematics, but we also work with their parents. So we mentor the parents of these kids, because if we don't do something to address the entire family and that home structure, that family structure, that kid is going back into a dysfunctional, discombobulated home that's not helping him or her succeed. And so we also then have what we call parent champions. And we work also with the parent university of CPS, Chicago Public Schools, have something called Parent University, because even the public schools recognize if the parents aren't engaged and involved in their children's education, the kids will not succeed and not do well, and they will drop out or have a high rate of truancy. And so we do both the kids and the parents. So that's our education strategy as preventative towards this violence. And then the third initiative is economic development. Someone has once said, the best way to stop a bullet is through jobs. So we help to prepare young men for jobs coming out of gangs. We help to provide them access, open doors to jobs where they can make a livable wage. We help them with GED programs to get them prepared to have certain jobs and to succeed. Help them to complete their GED, help them with job training, access to jobs. We also help them to get relocated to different neighborhoods where they are not so known when they decide to put the guns and the drugs down and step out of their gangs, in the gang life. And so economic development is a big part of what we do. We just acquired our first business which is a meat processing business, and we're planning to move it to Chicago within the next 14 to 16 months to create jobs. We have an agreement, a contract with Rush Presbyterian Hospital to help to localize their supply chain spending as much as possible. Again, to help minority business owners grow and scale their businesses so they can hire more guys who are otherwise selling drugs and guns on the street. And so economic development is a big part of what we do to try to address the problem, and again, provide a resource where guys can make a different decision rather than picking up a gun, selling drugs, etc., and getting them off of that track. So economic development is another piece. And then we have something called the Gospel Justice Centers. We have now, I think, 20 Gospel Justice Centers around the city in mostly high crime, high poverty neighborhoods. And that's a program where we recruit attorneys to come and set up a shop in a church on a Saturday morning once a month and provide pro bono services. About 70 to 80% of all legal issues that wind up in court are civil issues. The problem is if people can't afford a lawyer or they don't have good legal counsel to solve that civil issue, it becomes oftentimes a criminal issue, or they do something that is criminal because of the unresolved civil issue, and now they have a compounded problem. So we help people try to solve their civil issues before they turn into criminal issues for them. And so we recruit Christian attorneys, set up shop in these churches all over the city to offer those pro bono services for the clients that come. And we've got 20 of those Gospel Justice Centers now around the city. So you have the Gospel Justice Centers, you have economic development, you've got education initiative, the prayer as well initiative, and then of course going after the guys with the police, the custom notification piece, which directly deals with the guys and gets in front of their faces and know who the players are that are pulling triggers on the street. So that's our 5 different initiatives and how we approach this issue of violence. Is so complex, it really does need a complex strategy. And so if you look back at last year alone, violence, we had a year last year like 2016. Violence was up. We had over 800 plus murders and over 4,000 people shot. But we're Together as Chicago is working. All 5 of our initiatives are at work in this neighborhood called West Haven Park. We saw an incredible reduction in violence and in shooting. So we had a 60% reduction in homicides and a 40% reduction in shootings in the 12th district where we are working in the West Haven Park community, which is a subset of the 12th district. And so we know that our strategy is working. And these numbers, by the way, were gathered by the University of Chicago Crime Lab. So they have created this portal that tracks all the shootings across the city in every neighborhood, and all the organizations like Together Chicago that are focused on violence reduction. And so their numbers told us that we were the most successful at reducing violence last year than any other organization. There are about 20 organizations working in this violence reduction space, and Together Chicago was actually the most successful in reducing violence last year in the neighborhood where we're working. So now we're trying to expand and grow so that we can utilize our strategy in other neighborhoods experiencing violence. So let me stop right there and let you ask whatever questions that are coming to your mind regarding this issue.
Give folks a chance to think about questions. Michael, it's so incredible, so encouraging to hear the stories. And I can't help but think about, like, you know, I think about like William Wilberforce. We hear a story like that. We think about, you know, the end of the slave trade in England, and we can focus on his story. But I think his story is actually the story of collective impact, like you're talking about. Yep. You know, where it took so many people from so many different industries to attack a problem that is antithetical to the gospel. And so many people, I love the different kind of spheres of influence that you're talking about. I think about the different people that are on this call that are invested in some of those areas, and it can feel like, what is my little part, as a lawyer, as an educator, or whatever. But when you kind of hear and remember, the way that God works in our world and calls us to be a part of, I think it's so encouraging to lift our eyes to that. So just a comment to say thank you. I think one for shedding light, for giving us eyes to see, the bigger way that God is at work through each of these different areas. So
absolutely.
Yeah, thank you. Cliff, did you have a question? I see you.
Yeah, just listening to all this wonderful report, and I have met David in the past, David Dillon. And how is all of this activity funded? And to what extent is Together Chicago and these other organizations being supported financially by the city?
Great question. So we have several different funding streams. One is through individuals and churches that make donations on our website or send in a check, and they become financial partners, prayer partners with us. And so we have lots of individuals and churches that are funding us. So that's the first stream in one category. And then another stream is through foundations. We have several foundations that have set aside money for this particular cause or purpose. And so we write grant proposals, grant requests, and get funding from various foundations. The third stream of income is through fee for services that we provide. So I mentioned Rush Presbyterian Hospital. They pay us a fee to help try to localize their supply chain spending and bring to them minority-owned businesses in the dedicated community on the near west side that they can give contracts to, which will help them, these businesses, scale up their business with more business so that they can then hire more people from the community, get some guys off the street, and get them good paying, safe jobs, legal jobs. And then the city gave us a contract to help with the urban agriculture and to grow urban ag. So there's a lot of urban agriculturalists or farmers that are growing their produce, but they don't know how to take it to the marketplace. And so we have in our economic development team, we have guys that help urban farmers take their produce and actually grow their business that way. And the city pays us a fee for that. So fee for services is one way. And then we have some federal, state, and local grants for violence reduction that's also starting to come. And they're asking us to do what, RFPs, requests for proposals to those strategic funding sources from the government, different branches of the government. So those are the different ways that we're funding. And eventually, with this new acquisition of this business, our goal is to have several businesses that are profitable, that are able to share some of that profit to our nonprofit, Together Chicago, and eventually be funded primarily by our business ventures.
And Together Chicago is a 501c3.
It is. Mm-hmm. Yep. So any gifts that are given to us is a tax deductible to those who benefactors.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
I have a quick question, Michael. Sure. My name is Ben. I think it's on the Zoom. Whether we like it or not, I think a lot of Chicagoans are asked to report on accurately the state of violence in our city. I've found myself in that scenario many times with friends or family who don't know very much about the city, or maybe have misconceptions about the city. How would you encourage us to speak accurately about the realities of violence in Chicago? Mm-hmm. What are maybe 2 or 3 key points to address, or misconceptions to unseat when some of the folks like myself on this call are put in situations like that?
Yeah, that's a great question, and a very important one. The first thing I would say is to remind people that Chicago is a city of neighborhoods. We have 77 neighborhoods in the city of Chicago, and there are about 12 to 14 neighborhoods where 90% of all the gun violence happens. So if you're not living in one of those 12 to 14 neighborhoods, chances are you may never hear a gunshot in your neighborhood, right? And if you don't work in a neighborhood like that, you don't live in a neighborhood like that, you know, the chances are you're not going to be personally impacted by violence. The likelihood of you being impacted by violence will be minimal. So violence is not everywhere all the time across the entire city. That's one of the misconceptions, because when you do see it on the news, whether it's local news or news, national news, when Chicago is constantly in the news for gun violence, people do have the concept that, you know, Chicago, and they say, well, Chicago is the most violent city, but it's actually not when you break it down in the per capita. That's the other thing. Per capita, there are many other cities that are more violent than Chicago, per capita. So we might be like, I don't even think we're in the top 10 per capita, but we're at the top for the total number of shootings and the total number of homicides. We're often at the top, even compared to New York, LA. You know, those two cities combined, we have more shootings than they do. But when you look at our population compared to other cities and the violence per capita, other cities are more violent, if you look at it that way. So those are two things that I think right off the bat, I would help people get perspective on the violence for our city.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Other questions?
I have a comment first and then a question, but
Mm-hmm.
Mr. Allen, thank you so much. Honestly, this was so encouraging. I've been thinking a lot about gun violence and about just like, yeah, feeling burdened for the city in the last year or two. I have a lot of friends and church members who've been affected by gun violence. And there was a drive-by shooting recently where like a stray bullet landed on the sidewalk next to me, right? Like it feels very real and present. So it's just super encouraging to hear about all the work that you all are doing. And I went on the website of Together Chicago and was like looking for where to get involved. And I guess to that point, I am personally not a lawyer or a pastor or like a police officer, and wondered if you have thoughts about like where ordinary people can get involved beyond prayer.
Yeah, great. Thank you for that great question. So one way is if you know, like, my guess is you're employed somewhere, right? Okay. So let's say you know about a job opening in your company. Well, you can let us know and say, hey, my company's hiring, and maybe your company will hire people that have a criminal background. We need to know that. We need more companies. We need to know about more companies who are willing to take a look at hiring people with a criminal background. So you can say, hey, I have a company like that, and here you should know about them. And here's our HR manager, and we have 5 job openings that coming up this month or this year, and so that we can, you know, get your company on the list to get people. So that's one thing you can do. If your company is not currently hiring, or they don't currently hire people with a criminal background, maybe you can advocate with the leadership in your company and say, hey, I know an organization that will vet people with background, violent background or criminal background, and train them and so on and so forth. And I think our company ought to reconsider, you know, hiring people with a background and giving them a second chance. So you can become an advocate in the workplace of your own employment. That's one thing. Another thing you can possibly do is tutor or mentor. You can either tutor a student or you can mentor a parent. And you may not even have to be a parent yourself to be a mentor or a parent champion. But you could, if you feel like you were well parented, you have great parents, you love your parents, whether you come from a single parent home or a dual parent home, You know what it is to be parented well, or you might be a parent that is parenting well. Well, you can help be a mentor to a single mom, or a single dad, that kind of thing. And so we need people who can help plug in those. Reading, just the act of reading. There are tons of teachers who say, I would love if I can have volunteers come in and just read to my students for 30 minutes or 15 minutes a day. The average kid in the inner city Chicago has a 1,000,000-word gap, which is crazy. You may have heard about this. So by the time that child is born to the time they go to kindergarten, 1,000,000 less words are spoken and read to them than kids that are not raised in the inner city, poor, violent neighborhoods. And so that's crazy to think about. So you can help make up that 1,000,000-word gap by volunteering to go into a public school that's open to that program and just read for 15 or 30 minutes a day. All right, so those are some ways you can get involved. You can also write a check and financially support the work that we're doing. That will then help to touch a life. And so
Thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
thank you, Natalie.
Yeah. No, I think that's such a great question, Natalie, too. I'm excited too about the Gospel Justice Centers, Michael, and I know people who have no legal background necessarily, but have also volunteered as different intake and prayer and those kinds of things as well. So it makes me really excited even doing this series to expose folks to different ways that they can play a part, because I think this just so highlights the many people that it takes, people who care about people who care about those who are marginalized, who are underserved, those who need resources, so that all of us are working towards the flourishing of our city and the reduction of violence, as you've been talking about. Thanks for all the different pathways I think that you're connected to, so that we can all think about what is the part that we can play.
Absolutely. Yep. Yeah. Everybody's got a role to play. And what is really cool right now is that God seemingly, I believe God has really created this atmosphere of collaboration and collective impact. I don't think I've seen a more openness in our city than we have currently. I don't know when that window is going to close, but right now our schools are wide open. Government, I mean, in other words, the ACLU is not out there trying to shut Christians out of schools in Chicago. It's not happening. The ACLU is not, crying foul that the church is, engaged and involved in any sector of our society. It's like opened, because everybody realizes this is a big problem and we need all hands on deck. We don't care who you are. And so that's the most encouraging thing, is that we're finding any and everywhere we go, people are like, yes, please come help this. We're glad to. And so, and we're willing to work with people from, so it's a great, I use this illustration like the Great Chicago Fire. When the fire was burning down the city of Chicago in the 1800s, people weren't running around saying, hey, the city's burning down. Are you Methodist or Presbyterian? Are you a North Sider or a West Sider? Are you Baptist or, are you Republican or Democrat? No, none of those questions matter. None of those labels matter when the city's burning down. All that matters is, do you have a cup of water, a fire hydrant, a fire, a squirt gun? What do you have to put out this fire? That's all. That's the only question that matters. In the same way, our city's burning down with gun violence. It doesn't matter whether you live on the north side, west side, or south side. It doesn't matter whether you're Presbyterian, Baptist, or Methodist. It doesn't matter whether you're Pentecostal or Republican or Democrat. All that matters is, what resource did God put in your hand? What gift do you have that you can lend to help serve and do your part to stop this gun violence? And so that's really an amazing opportunity that we all have to just do our part, no matter how small you think it might be. So bring your fish and your loaves and put it in Jesus' hands, and watch him bless it and feed the multitude. You know, that's the analogy.
Can you comment at all on what's under why the great increase we've seen in violence just over the last year or so? I'm sure it's
You know, a lot of people are talking about the stresses of COVID that is stressing a lot of people out. Even the FBI at the end of, actually in the fall of last year, the FBI came out with a report saying that gun violence is up 30% for the first time in history outside of urban centers. And that was scary, because they said they've never seen this uptick in violence outside of the urban centers. So that means in rural areas, in suburban areas, there's a 30% uptick in violence like never before. And that was from the FBI. So that means that violence obviously is spreading outside of typical areas, high density, high poverty areas in cities. The cause of that is not clear totally to everybody. Some say, well, it's COVID. Others say it's, you know, gangs. Others say it's education. My personal thought is it's a combination of those things, but I think at the root of it is the breakdown of the family. So as the family disintegrates, as we have more and more children being born outside of marriage, without a mom and a dad in the home, as there's more alcoholism and drug addiction in families like that, and there's more abuse. There's an old saying in counseling, hurt people hurt people. And I've sat and listened to enough of these guys who are gang involved tell me their story, and it will just wreck your heart and mind when you hear them talk about how they were raised and the family structure in which they were raised. These young men are so traumatized. I mean, there's something called the ACEs score. ACEs is adverse effect of ACEs, adverse effect of childhood experiences, something like that, or adverse childhood experiences, ACEs. And they ask you questions about traumatic incidents as a child. There are, I think, 10 questions. And if you have, or 6 questions, if you have like 3 or more, you are really traumatized and need counseling. Most of the guys that we deal with on the street have like 5 or 6 of those traumatic things that have happened to them in their life. Things like being physically abused, sexually abused, verbally abused, you know, emotionally abused, stuff like that. Going to bed hungry many times throughout your at night, sleeping, you know, in a rat infested, roach infested place where rats and roaches are all over you at night. You can't sleep, stuff like that. Most of our guys have been there, dealing with a person who's been violent in your home, a parent, or moms and dads been prostitutes and pimps, people being shot. You see people shot and killed in front of you as a child. Almost every single one of our guys have had those childhood experiences, traumatic experiences. So they themselves are traumatized. So they don't trust anybody, and they have all this pain and guilt and shame. And so they act out violently, even unbeknowingly, because of all of that stuff. So I think it's a combination of things, Clifton, but the breakdown of the family is at the center of it, which is the reason why everything we do at Together Chicago is about strengthening the family, strengthening the family's finances, strengthening the family relationships between parent and child, strengthening the education of the family, and between, you know, mentoring the parents as well as the kids, and even housing, helping them to get suitable housing or safer housing in safer neighborhoods. So everything we do is to help sort of strengthen, rebuild, undergird that family, because the family is the nucleus of society. And as society breaks down, it's because the family is breaking down. So we've got to do everything we can to address the issues in the family. So
thank you.
Goodness. Yeah, thank you so much, Michael. I feel like there are like 100 more questions we could ask, and we could sit and listen to you share and all afternoon. But this has been so, yeah, I think it's been so encouraging. It's been sobering. I think it's given some vision for prayer, for what we need to beg the Lord for, and even for like, what does it look like for each of us to think about how we put our hands to this work to some degree, just even as you said, offering the Lord the little that maybe we have. But I think, yeah, I thank you for the opportunities to even do that and think about that. And thank you for sharing with us today. It's been really, really good to learn about.
One last thing,
yeah, thank you so much.
real quick. You mentioned about trauma counseling. We do have access to trauma counseling, which is a huge thing. In fact, Thursday, all of our street outreach workers are getting a trauma counseling training session. And so a lot of our staff that works in the violence reduction space, as well as our participants who are our clients, have access to trauma counseling, which is so very, very important. So yes, part of what we do.
Oh yeah, that's a good note. Thank you, Natalie, for mentioning that. Well, I would just definitely continue to point you to the website to look at some of those different areas, different trainings that are coming up for sure. Check out the prayer night on January 30th. Next week, we get to hear from Mark, who's going to talk about the academic development aspect of Together Chicago. And so I know that will be incredibly enlightening as well and encouraging for us to hear about. So thank you once again, Michael. Thanks everybody for tuning in. I know we've got lunch hour here, so we're praying for you as you go back into the spaces the Lord has called you to this afternoon. Look forward to seeing you next week. Thanks so much.
Thanks everybody.
Bye, everybody.
God bless you. Bye-bye.